Good evening and welcome, everybody. I'm Terry Kay of the Jewish Grandparents Network. And tonight we have another experience in the Family Room Live series. Tonight we have as our special guests Jane Isay and Tiffany Shlain. The Family Room will be, in October when it launches, a virtual meeting space where grandparents can find all sorts of experiences to do with their grandchildren in the arts, in gardening, gaming, cooking, and so on. For example, there's going to be a section on esports where you can learn how you can engage with your grandchildren who might love Minecraft. I'm going to introduce Jane and Tiffany in a moment. I did first want to give a brief shout out to my two wonderful colleagues who are on the call as well. One is Lee Hendler, who is co-founder of the Jewish Grandparents Network and president of the board. And the second is Eileen Vogelstein, who is a remarkable early childhood educator and is vice president. And a special shout out to my colleague, David Raphael, the co-founder with Lee of the Jewish Grandparents Network and our CEO, who is traveling with his son and couldn't be here. Tonight, we are so pleased to welcome Jane Isay and Tiffany Shlain to talk to us about the making of a Mensch, how grandparents can contribute to and mold the character development of their grandchildren. Two quick notes before I introduce Jane and Tiffany, and it'll be brief. One, if you have a question, please write it in the chat box. We will be monitoring it throughout the next 45 minutes to an hour, and we expect to have lots of time for Q&A and after the initial discussion. And two is we have a large and a lovely group here tonight. So we suggest that you make your Zoom view speaker, put it to speaker view, rather than gallery view. And I think that'll help you really be able to focus on the speaker. Now to our two participants and our special guests. Jane Isay is the author of the wonderful book, Unconditional Love, a guide to navigating the joys and challenges of being a grandparent today. Jane has also written Walking on Eggshells, Navigating the Delicate Relationship Between Adult Children and Their Parents, and other books about family life. Jane serves on many nonprofit boards and lives in New York City, close to her 4 grandchildren. Tiffany Shlain is an Emmy-nominated filmmaker, founder of the Webby Awards, and author of the national best-selling book, 24/6, Giving Up Screens 1 day a week to get more time, creativity, and connection. Tiffany is a winner of the Marshall McLuhan Outstanding Book Award and has received over 80 awards and distinctions for her films and work, and was also included on NPR's list of best commencement speeches. What we're going to do is in the chat, we will put links to Tiffany and Jane's books and their websites. Meanwhile, over to you both, Tiffany and Jane.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you. I've known Tiffany for a few years now, and I just love her. She's so smart. She's so warm. She's so innovative. And it's just a delight to be with you, Tiffany, talking about the making of a Mensch as grandparents. This book, Unconditional Love, came about because the people at Harper and Row wanted a book for grandparents as the baby boomers were becoming grandparents. They asked me to do it. And I traveled I had by that time 4 grandchildren. I traveled all over the country interviewing grandparents, the parents of the grandchildren. That's a key thing here. And the grandchildren, grown grandchildren, about their experience. How they remembered and saw their grandparents. And it's all about love. All about love. What struck me as I traveled around and talked to people and listened to them, what struck me was the role that we as grandparents play in the moral imagination of our grandchildren. Now, what is the moral imagination? It's what Tiffany so clearly calls a Mensch. You have empathy. You listen to people. You have a sense of perspective, and you're decent, and you're generous, and you're kind. That's the heritage that many of us wish to pass on to our grandchildren. And I believe and argue in this book that we can do that without having to take them to the ballet. That just by loving them, just by hearing them, just by listening to them, just by accepting them in a way their parents can't, because their parents have to worry about their table manners. The grandchildren are seen and understood in a way that is a miracle grow for character. And that is what I think we're put on. We've lived, this is a shehechianu. We have lived long enough to be grandparents, to have a hand, just a pat, not a big hand, but a little pat on the character of our grandchildren. It's a wonderful thing. Now, I believe that the 4 pillars of moral imagination are empathy, perspective, knowledge, and agency. I think empathy is the key one. And the psychologists tell us, you cannot be empathic. It's very hard to be empathic if you've never experienced empathy. So, and you don't have to rush up to your grandchildren and say, how are you today? What you might remember all of us doing is when a child is looking a little sad, you give them a hug and say, you okay? That is a key to character. Now, perspective we have because we've lived long. I think particularly in this time, we've all seen it. Our perspective, we have lived through some very difficult times in American history in our lives. We're living in a catastrophe at the moment and everybody's upset, but perhaps our perspective gives the kids a notion that they will survive as we have survived. My grandparents died in the flu epidemic of 1918. And so my grandchildren know all about survival. There are 18 of us now from the 4 sisters. And they were orphaned and they made it. And so those family stories, and we all tell family stories, and they're all stories of difficulty and survival. That's how we help them. Our knowledge. We know more, we've forgotten more than they know at the moment, and we know even more than their parents do, imagine. So we can tell stories, we can help them, we can talk about things with them, we can have those conversations that enrich their souls. And the fourth pillar is agency. What do I mean by that? I mean that we believe in them. We may, if she wants to be an artist, we're not going to say, how do I have the money to send them to college and then they're going to be on the street? We can say, let's see your paintings. A story from one of the women, one of the grandchildren I interviewed. She was in New York. She was a graduate of an acting school and she wanted to be an actress. And she told the story. Her grandpa was a redneck. He had a pickup truck. They spent their summers with grandma and grandpa on a farm in the South. And he would attach a tarp to the back of the pickup truck. The grandchildren would all sit on the tarp and he would drive so that each of them so that they all fell off. I mean, he would be in jail now. And she wanted to be an actress so much. And one day, she told the story, one day she came running out of the house. Her mother and her father said, you can't do this, you can't do this. And she was crying. And he said, what's the matter, darling? And she said, I want to be an actress and they don't think I can do it. Now, Grandpa had lit a fire every night. He was sitting by the fire, it was dark. And he looked up, he pointed up to the stars. And she said, what you doing? What are you doing, Papa? And he said, I see your name written in the stars. That's what we can do. And that's what we do every day. And we are the miracle grow. Our love is the miracle grow of our grandchildren's character.
Oh, that was so beautiful. The miracle grow is such a great metaphor. And well, first, I just want to say thank you for the Jewish Grandparents Network. What a great gathering. What a great concept. And to make a friend like Jane, an intergenerational friend at this point in both of our lives, I think has been such a delight for us.
Yes.
Really a gift. And I had the pleasure of her doing an edit of my book. So I got to see how her beautiful mind works. And everything she says to me, I remember and just quote to other people. So I share Jane's wisdom far and wide. So Miracle Grow is a new one. And I'm so glad you mentioned Miracle Grow, because not only is it the Jewish New Year, but it's Shemitah, which not enough people know about, but it's all about how you need to let the land, the soil rest every 7 years. And in Israel, they don't farm. And I'm a believer that we are the farmers and the gardeners of our souls. And the first thing I'm going to share with you has been something that I feel like has let my kids' brains rest. And I hope they bring it on to their grandchildren, which is that we turn off all screens for Shabbat. We are Jewish. We are not religious. I thought people that did full days of rest were only Orthodox Jews. So it didn't feel like it was accessible to me. But 12 years ago, almost, we started, actually, when I lost my dad, actually, when you were talking about, it's a privilege to be grandparents. And my father loved being a grandfather. And he used to say, he was very close with my older daughter, but my younger one, he never got to meet. And it's a privilege. I feel very fortunate that all the women and older men in my life have looked forward to getting older. Like my mother-in-law, Bubby's on, my mother and my dad thought life got better when it got longer. So I think it's a gift to live long, to have grandchildren. But the thing that I've really instilled into our family with Ken, Anne's son, is we turn off all screens 1 day a week for what we call our tech Shabbats, which is what I wrote about in the book. But what I really found with so many screens, and I'm sure all of you here, you're like, I'm 51, so half of my life I grew up analog. And then the other half of my life, the screens have multiplied like hamsters everywhere. And I can tell you as a parent, it's the most beautiful day to work on empathy, perspective, knowledge, and connection, or when we turn the screens off. And we do it from Shabbat, Friday night to Saturday night. And it is, I almost think, like if you talked about miracle growth, Jane, it's like, it's the day that most of the important elements that we're trying to imbue in our kids happen, is on that Shabbat. And then Shemitah, which is the year we're in, is so exciting because that's the word, it's why professors take sabbaticals every 7th year to refresh their brain. And that's the year we're in. And being in California right now, where my state is on fire, literally, I can tell you we need to rest the land and we need to rest our brains in order to have space to have internal thinking, to maybe even be bored, to connect in a different way. So 1 day a week, we do all these things in my house. We live very analog and it's awesome. So that's my first thing I want to impart. And I kind of, in my book, 24/6, I talk about how we brought it into our lives and how much it's brought. The second thing is I did make a film called The Making of a Mensch, which I know Terry will send afterwards. It's a 10-minute film, but I really was interested in learning about Musar, which is really about character development. And I had made a film called The Science of Character that looked at the neuroscience and social science of character development. And then all these Jewish educators who've used my films, they were like, well, why didn't you mention Musar, as if I had been a bad Jew by not knowing it? I had no idea what Musar is. It's also called Musar. It's pronounced 2 different ways. And the more I did research, it was all this incredible Jewish wisdom, all about character development, all about practices and empathy and connection and meditation and like all these things that, of course, we borrow from all these other cultures, but we have it within our own culture. But I think my whole life's work is really unleashing Jewish wisdom that is either been used only like if you're really observant. And so like Shabbat, like most people just do like the candles, and that's like a beautiful part of it. But the full day of rest is so powerful. And Musar is, I mean, it's kind of come back in vogue in the last 5 years, but it was this obscure body of thought around being a good person that I put into the filmmaking of a Mensch. So we talk a lot, and I hate that the word Mensch is mostly used for guys. The feminist here, I use it for women all the time. And I would challenge all of you to use it a lot on your daughters and granddaughters and women around you, because I'm trying to make that. And actually, if you look at the root of the word Mensch, it's not masculine or feminine.
Yeah.
It's a German word about being a good person. So let's all make that word used more for women, because being a Mensch is just being a good person. So Tech Shabbat, being a Mensch. And then the third story that I only learned about as an adult, which I love, 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 love. And I think it is a lot about trying to imbue qualities in your children and grandchildren, is that everybody should carry 2 notes in their pocket. And in one pocket, the note says, "The whole entire world was made for me." And in the other pocket, the note says, "I am only dust and ashes." And I think it's about humility. It's about knowing when to summon up courage and when to summon up humility. And I think those both are important, because sometimes you're like, you're so special, you're so fabulous. I know you're not supposed to say special anymore, but my parents used to have. And then others are like, you're ordinary and you have to do the work and you have to like think of the bigger context. So I really love that story to tell the children and the grandchildren. And then the last thing I'll say is that it's been so fun to watch my mom and my late father and Bubby and Zeta grandparent our children, because you are right. Like our oldest daughter just went to college a couple weeks ago. And I remember what my dad used to say, he's like, "I love being a grandparent. Like, you guys have to do all that disciplining and I can just love them." And it's what you said, Jane. It's so beautiful. It's like it's a different kind of love. And what a gift to be able to love in that different way. So why can't we say special anymore? Somebody said, oh, there was a whole line of thinking that you're not supposed to say you're special, because I don't know if Jane, I mean, my parents told me that. I don't think that was a bad thing, but there was, I do a lot of work around social and emotional learning. And there was a point where you're not supposed to say they're special, because it makes them think that they don't have to do the work, or they're extraordinary in a way that pulls them out. I don't know, Jane, if you have any thoughts about that.
I think we're in a time of such sensitivity. I think it's a Gutenberg Revolution. I think the fact that we have social media and all has just upset everything. It's very much like Gutenberg. When they invented movable type, anybody could write anything and get it printed. When I was at Basic Books, we published a book called The Great Cat Massacre, which was about the broadsides that he argued brought on the French Revolution. We got the Reformation because of type. Yeah. Now we have 1,000 different ways of communicating. Everybody has too much input, and everybody's very sensitive. So you can't say special. You can't say.
I'm saying special. No, it is an interesting. I mean,
but I also think that let me respond more seriously to this. I think that being loved for who you are is the secret. Whatever you're called, I think a lot of kids I think there's a whole world of giving them prizes just because they showed up.
Right, that's what it's part of, yeah.
Created some problems. But I think grandparents, we are the anchor. We're the moral anchor. We think every grandchild is special. When I have dinner now with my 17-year-old grandson, who's quite tall, and of course I think he's the most handsomest thing on the planet, I have a split screen with when I first held him as a baby. And that kind of love that we feel for our grandchildren, not necessarily the same kind of love we feel for, I just want to say we have permission for having a favorite, even if we don't tell them. we have permission to think that one of them really needs some training when it comes to table manners. That's all right, but we love them for who they are, and this is really it. We don't have to give them prizes, and we don't have to discipline them. One other thing I just want to say quickly is that the key to the door to the playroom is the grown children. And one of our jobs, in order to be grandparents, comfortable grandparents, we have to have figured out a way to get along with our grown children, which is in many ways harder than it is to get along with the grandchildren. The grandchildren, we love each other, they love us. The grown children, should we give them advice? No. During COVID, they took me over. It was like taking the keys, saying I couldn't drive. Mom, you have to get a test. Mom, this, and they were right. But it was really, and I said to myself, I think they're doing this because are they doing this because they love me, or are they doing this because it's fun to take over? And I finally decided they didn't want to bury me on Zoom. So they were going to try to keep me alive.
So many things you said, but one of them was that about social media, which I think a lot about. I mean, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. When I make a movie, I do a newsletter, I put all of that. I love all the tools to get ideas out there. But there's always a point when I'm on social media, or I see my kids on it, or just when it feels good, doesn't feel good. And what I think that social media is at its core stems back to something that Jane said, is that everybody just wants to be wanted, seen, and loved. That's it. And social media gives this weird facsimile of that. It's like you get this echo of that feeling, but you never get the feeling. So I think as parents and grandparents, and the more we can give that authentically, hopefully they won't be seeking it as much in these kind of Xerox versions of being wanted, seen, and loved. I mean, it's almost like funhouse mirrors of those emotions, because and the algorithms of the tech companies are manipulating all those things so much, so you're not even getting an accurate summation of it. So it's an interesting thing to think about how much of all of that is out of this core desire that we all have. And it has all of these different manifestations all throughout the years, but it's just because we want to be told that we're special. Yeah. I love you. I believe in you. You can tell me anything. And I think
a great future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, you were saying, I want to tell everyone something you told me, but maybe I'll save it at the end, that I always think about when I can't remember something. Can I just share that with them before we get back to the, okay, Jane told me this great thing. Okay, let me go to gallery view. Okay. How many of you on a daily or weekly basis forget a word or something? Okay, let's all raise our hands. Okay, we're all human. So Jane told me this great thing. She's like, whenever you forget a word, I want you to think of your brain as this incredible forest that is overgrown with wisdom and knowledge. And whenever you can't remember a word, just imagine a little white mouse has to trudge through this incredibly gorgeous, intricate forest to find the information, because it's so overgrown and so wise. And I'll tell you that metaphor, when I can't think of something, I'm like, oh, I'm sending the mouse out, I'll be right back. It makes it much more fun to think about. So I'm just leaving you with that a little morsel. But Jane, before the Zoom officially started, you were talking about Moses, which is the appropriate time of year to talk about Moses. Do you want to share that great insight that you had? I thought that was beautiful.
I'd love to. I run a webinar for grandparents through a GAT meeting center in Western Pennsylvania, in Western Massachusetts, called the Rowe Center. And we get together every other Monday. I started it when COVID hit, because grandparents were in such mourning because they couldn't see their grandchildren. Now, 18 months later, we're still getting together every other week. And it's a group of what I call Kickass Grandmas. I think They're dedicated, they're engaged, they back to being in contact with their grandchildren. A couple of them have teenage grandchildren who couldn't get along with their parents. They've moved in with grandma. And we were talking, and they were all socially active. Now, in this year of Shemitah, in which the Torah recommends a readjustment of the economy of the people, we're all focusing on the readjustments that we need in our life, in our world. And we were talking, we're doing this, we're doing that. Many of us are involved, making phone calls, writing postcards, and many, many other things, the whole range. And I said at some point, I'm not going to live long enough to see the fruits of the social change that is happening. And somebody said, it's like Moses not getting to Mount Sinai, not getting to the Holy Land. So I told the story 4 years ago, this past Shabbat, which is Shabbat Shuvah. My grandson was bar mitzvah, and the reading was the death of Moses. And God takes Moses up to see the Holy Land, the promised land, but Moses cannot go in, cannot enter. And the tutor said to Benji, Moses wept, famous phrase. And the tutor said, why do you think Moses was weeping? And Benji, at 13, said, well, I'm sure he was sad he couldn't get into the promised land. Then he thought for a minute and he said, but also maybe these were tears of joy for all that God had helped him do. So I see one of our great messages is to project onto our grandchildren, to help them see and join in the values that are so key to us. We will not live to see that promised land because our time is limited, but that is no reason for us to desist from working to create a world and a future for our grandchildren and for their children. So we have this great responsibility and great opportunity to be the quiet engineers of change and progress. That is a gift.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Can we jump to we've got some fascinating questions. Are you okay?
Yeah, we're ready.
Lee Hendel asks, can you please address the mutual benefit of the grandparent and grandchild relationship, the mutual benefit, and for you, especially Jane, the invisibility of being older in our culture?
Great question. So I live in Manhattan. I walk on Madison. Madison Avenue is my street. They don't even see me. They're bumping into me, and it's not just because of the phones. It's because they don't see me. When I walk into the house of one of them with grandchildren, they run and hug me. Grandma, they say. And even when they're teenagers, hi, Grandma, they say. I exist in their lives, in their faces. It is the antidote to invisibility. Plus the fact that who cares if they see us or not, just so long as they don't trip us, because we are creating the future, not the ones who don't see us.
Yeah, I actually wanted to speak to my own grandparents, who I remember so well. And my grandfather escaped from Odessa, and he was the only one in the back of a hay truck when he was 15, and he had a big family. And he came to America and, sent all these letters and money. And then he found out that they all died in the Holocaust. And that story made such a profound impression on me. His story of struggle. He actually didn't want to talk about it ever. And it was only when I found letters and it was like a profile of him in Detroit that I learned more. But Ken and I ended up naming our daughter Odessa because of that. And because we both had family from that part of the world. And we thought it was amazing that these blonde, blue-eyed Jews survived and had a child. We named her Odessa, which is so fun when people meet her because my family's from Odessa. And so that's a beautiful link. And then on my mother's side, and then my grandma Frances was like the quintessential Jewish Bubby. I was so close with her. She was just so warm and wonderful. And my mother's parents, who, you know, it was interesting because I just idolized them and in a different way, but their stories of hardship and what they overcame, they're so important. And again, we're not, you know, we're made up of stories. And the more you can share with your grandkids something you overcame and a story that you want them to be telling to their grandkids. And I love that, you know, that saying in the Talmud, you know, it's not what you teach your children, it's what you teach your children's children. And that if you really think of your life, like we all just took a minute and thought, what is the most important story I want recorded in their minds to retell to their grandchildren, that'll get retold to their grandchildren? What is that story? What story represents your journey, your struggle, you're overcoming that struggle, something to inspire them, to motivate them? I mean, it's a really beautiful thing when you think of what do we remember and what are we going to remember of them, that we're part of this long lineage, which is also interesting because of the Holocaust, you know, we only know our grandparents' generation, like we don't know anything above that. But I'm curious, especially with social media and all of these ways, I mean, you know, the term like in the cloud, like we'll all be in the cloud, like every email and photo and text we ever sent, like our great grandkids can like completely reconstruct our lives.
Yes.
If they wanted to.
My son, I have a son who founded one of those, the Storycorps, which is the greatest collection of human,
which is wonderful. Yeah.
In the history of the world. And all these conversations are stored in the Library of Congress. And it was because of my mother. So this is what happened. We lived in New Haven. My parents lived in New York, and my mother had raised her sisters because of the flu epidemic. So the aunts were the family, and they would come up to New Haven. David had a tape recorder when he was 9, and he taped conversations with my mother, who was a force of nature, and the aunts. When we moved to New York, we lost the tapes.
Oh.
And every couple of months he'd say, "Maude, you know those tapes?" Fast forward to 20 years ago, this week. He was a radio, David reinvented documentary radio 30 years ago. And when he got his MacArthur, he decided he wanted to do something where we would capture the conversations and keep my mother alive. She by this time had died. And then we had this event 20 years ago on the 11th of September. And David had a friend whose friend was the grandson of the oldest firefighter to die in the towers. And 2 weeks before the event, he had interviewed his grandpa about being a firefighter. And David got the interview, and he cut it, and it ran on the Saturday morning NPR. And he realized, he said to himself, I lost my conversations with grandma and the aunts, and think of all the people who never were able to have conversations with the people they loved. I think I'll start something. So he did. And he started Storycorps, and he made one phone call that made it possible. He called the head of the American Folklife program at the Library of Congress. And he said, if I do this, will the Library of Congress collect these digital versions of the conversations? She said, yes. There are 600,000 of them. And you can do it now. You don't have to.
Everyone should. Yeah, there's an app you can do it now. I mean, Bubby has done it. My mother-in-law, all of my parents did it. It's incredible. It's incredible.
And when the pandemic happened, he realized that I couldn't see his children, and he developed one where you can do it on the site. Storycorps Connect. You can do it not together. So yeah, and we know the psychology. We know that our stories,
our narrative,
our narrative. Also, I think it's very important, again, in this time, resilience comes from having overcome difficulty. resilience doesn't come from getting a prize every time you go to school.
Well, one thing, 2 notes to that. Terry, we'll be sure to put the Storycorps website in the follow-up email so you guys can all check that out. But I mean, even during the pandemic, a lot of parents now, not grandparents, are like, oh, I feel so bad for the kids. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think they went through something. It's going to make them tougher. It's going to make them resilient and creative and stronger. Like, I guess and we weren't going to war. I mean, there was a lot of hardship for sure. But I feel like every generation has something that defines them, and figuring out how to be resilient and flexible and adaptable. I mean, our situation has changed like 12 times in the last 18 months, and you have to constantly be adaptable with new information. I think that's what that's taught the kids. The other thing I see in a chat is somebody saying, we're talking about limiting technology, but of course it helped. And of course, I mean, what would the pandemic have been like without technology? It's incredible. I mean, the first several months of the pandemic, Bubby, and we were gathering the whole family and lighting candles together on Zoom, and it's so incredible. And I love technology. I founded the Webby Awards. I love the power of it. I just don't love it 24/7. Yeah. And I don't think it's good for anybody's brains, whether you live alone, whether you live with a couple or a family, to be on screens all the time. There's tons of research I make a lot of films on neuroscience. There's so much research that your brain was not designed to be on all the time. It's being over-farmed, just like the earth. And you must give your brain time a whole day, I think, based on our ancestors saying it's the 4th commandment. And I always trip out on that. Again, I look at the 10 commandments from an intellectual perspective, not religious, but I look at it as these are the 10 ways to live a good life. And wow, taking a full day of rest is number 4. It is above honor thy mother, thy father. It is above do not commit murder, is take a complete day of rest. And you know who does that? Hardly anyone, unless you're an Orthodox Jew. So I really think, wow, here's this brilliant, elegant idea of a full day of rest. And I want to bring it back. And we've never needed it more. So I love technology. I just don't love it all the time. And I know that my favorite memories as a family always happen on Tech Shabbat. When we're not recording it, we're not photographing it, we're not documenting it, we're not being interrupted by text from other people, we're just together. And I think that Simone Weil said that attention is the highest form of generosity. And I actually think, when I think of the grandparents in my life, they give attention to the kids. I mean, Ken and I are 2 working parents. We're juggling working and making dinner and grocery shopping and paying the bills. And we've got a million things that everybody remembers when you were a parent. You're trying to do everything. And Tech Shabbat's the one day where I feel totally present, but grandparents get to be present almost all the time, which is a gift. It's the highest form of generosity, is to give attention to your grandkids.
So we thank you so much, Tiffany. We have a ton of questions, and we have about 10 or 15 minutes left, and I want to try to get to as many questions as we can. Joanne Klein, also known as Nana, asks, do you believe that grandparents have the strongest influence on their grandchildren's religious belief and practice?
I don't know, because I'm a Reformed Jew, and I think my goal is to have an effect on their character. And I can't answer that. Sorry.
Okay. I think it's interesting, the fact that my grandfather, he really shunned religion, because I think he associated religion, as many people of his generation, as being the reason that that his family died.
Yeah.
So for him, I did not grow up with Shabbat. They were American before they were Jewish. And I think that was the case. And how did that influence me? I mean, I think a lot about it. I think a lot about the swing of like institutions and individuality. And to me, always, it's like, what's the wisdom that withstands the test, but it's timely and timeless? But I don't know if I could answer that either, because I'm certainly not, I wouldn't say that I've mirrored that, but I know, so many generations like push against their previous generation, but I'm wondering if it skips it for the grandparents. I don't know.
All right. Well, then back to your story about, Tech Shabbat and so on. Erwin asks, one of my daughters does not allow her 3 0.6-year-old child to see any screens, and our husband is a professional techie. Is this going too far?
I mean, listen, the fact that the leaders of all the tech companies don't allow their kids to use screens should tell you that their brain, I mean, I made this film, which I'll make sure is in a link. It's a 10-minute film called Brain Power, and it's the first 5 years of life, why that's so important for brain's development. It's the most malleable period of the brain's development. And if anything they do, it's strengthening that part of their brain, and anything they don't do, it's weakening. And that's the same for all of us. So the minute that your child is bored, or you want them to be distracted, you hand them a screen, they're going to strengthen that muscle of like, I need to be entertained. I need to be stimulated. I need to be numbed, whatever it is. So I think there's a balance. It's not like our kids use technology, but I think I feel good about that because we do tech Shabbat. And I think every parent right now wrestles with it. It's a big thing to wrestle with. We even wrestle with it doing tech Shabbat. So I think it is one of the issues of our time. There are many: climate, rights, all these things, Black lives, all these things. One of them is, when should you be online and when should you be off? It's a big philosophical question. Right now in the workforce, that's a big question right now, as everyone's not wanting to go back to the office. So it is a big question to wrestle with. The Jews are great. I loved when I learned that Israel means to wrestle or to struggle. That is what Jews do best. So I would say wrestle and struggle with, when is tech good and when does it take away?
Right. And the difference between husband and wife, that's a lifelong wrestling.
But I was going to say, I think somebody's asking about the Zoom holobake. I'm so glad. So the first 5 months of the pandemic, I did a Zoom holobake every week. It was amazing, community building, but then it became all that I did. And I actually do other things. So, but a lot of people lately have been asking, so I think I might do another one. So if you're interested in that, we'll do a follow-up link. But I make call every Friday, and we were doing it with like 300 people from all over the world, and it was very fun.
Great. That's great.
Lisa Miller says that grandparents are the special spiritual partners of grandchildren. And you can respond to that in a moment. I want to just show you that Lisa Miller is actually going to be a presenter at a live event we're doing in November.
Beautiful.
Great.
So she's phenomenal. These are her 2 books that will be particularly pertinent to our discussion.
Wonderful.
Great.
Yeah.
And we will let you know in our Facebook group how to sign up, and we will be in touch with all of you. So anything you'd like to say about that grandparents are the special spiritual partners of grandchildren? What does that mean?
Here's what I think it means. I think she's totally right. Because the time we spend together is quiet time. It's the developmental time that Tiffany's talking about. We'll have a conversation. Maybe we'll play cards. Maybe we'll take a walk. This is the time in a child's life when they are breathing the love, the unconditional love, without judgment, without expectation, just plain love. And I can tell you from the people that I've interviewed of all generations, especially the grown grandchildren, that love, the admiration they feel for us, they may not say it, but they've watched us. Children are the best observers, the scientists in the crib. Our example of unconditional love, of acceptance of them, breeds in them an understanding and an aspiration for their lives. One of the people I interviewed for this book, his grandma fled the Nazis, blah, blah, blah. Her husband died and she was blind. She had a seeing eye dog. And he talked to her as a grown-up, he talked to her an hour or 2 every weekend. He was in Brooklyn, she was in New Jersey. There were no cars, so they did it by phone. And the family was gathered around her bed when she died in the hospital. And I said, what did you think when Oma passed? And he said, I thought, if I could live a life where I had a family as loving as Oma's family, it would have been a life well spent.
Let's super beautiful. And I actually, I thought a lot about this idea of, I want to read, I want to read the last paragraph of my whole book, because it speaks directly to that. If I have the privilege of living long enough to see my hair turn gray, and if I experience the joy of having grandchildren that I can hold in my sun-spotted hands, and if on my final day, as my body is shutting down, I lose my ability to speak with only my eye contact left, I would hope Ken, Odessa, Bluma, my brother, sister, best friend, and grandchildren are all gathered around me, leaning into me close enough to hear what my eyes are saying. And here's what they would try to convey: more presence, more appreciating, more compassion, more laughing, more dancing, more making, more kneading dough, more mistakes, more I'm sorry, more I forgive you, more contact, more hugs, more daydreaming, more silence, more eating together at the table, more joy, more authentic connecting, more looking up, more love. And I think that's hopefully what, I love that idea that you can say so many things, but they're just watching exactly what you do. And that parenting and grandparenting is just modeling behavior. So what you focus your attention on, you're saying that's important.
Yes, I think that's beautiful, Tiffany. Beautiful book. I think that especially in this time, we are modeling survival. And I think they notice it. I know they notice it. They know, and we are not 100% successful. I used to, when my kids were small, I used to tell them about how I didn't get into my first choice college. When my grandchildren were small, I told them about the number of times I got fired. In the book business, being hired one more time than being fired is the beginning of a great career, or which is my story. But everybody wants these children to succeed. We're here to say, nah, we've been through some hard times too. And we're here, and you'll be here. At Passover, I asked the children after the meal, I said to them, either we've had, I don't know whether we've been in the desert these 400 days or whether we've been still in Egypt, but imagine we've been in the desert instead of 40 years, 400 days. The rabbis say God kept the Israelites in the desert so they could learn new skills. I didn't talk about killing off a generation. We're living in that. What have you learned? And my 13-year-old granddaughter said, who suffered so the loss of her classmates. She said, I've learned my family is more important than my friends. And the 16-year-old said, I've learned I can get through hard times. We're modeling this because we have been through hard times. We're modeling love, even if you don't get into Harvard. Now, Odessa got into Yale, but not everybody's child is going to do that. And all of the ups and downs, children see us and adults as models, as people who they can never come up to that level. And we're here to say, I love you whatever level. And I didn't meet all of my expectations either. And if you don't, it's okay, because be a wonderful person. That's what we will love. And that's the making of a Mensch.
I don't know how to go after that.
Right. So I was going to say any final words, but maybe those are the final words.
I think, here's what I love about getting older. And I'm 51. I know the grandparents around here have been through a lot more of life, but I love the perspective. That's what Jane was just talking about. And you only have that when you're older. And I've talked with Jane before about the Spanish flu, because I remember Ken's used to say, well, gosh, my grandpa Harry must have been around then, but I didn't hear him talk about it. And it was interesting how much we didn't, like, one of the favorite we saw this documentary that actually wasn't very good about the Spanish flu right at the beginning of the pandemic, but my favorite parts were the journals. And I think that from people living in that time. And I think it's such a gift to share with your kids what life was like when you were younger, your hardships, your triumphs. I thought it was going to be this, I was that, I thought this was love, then it was that, you know, like love evolved, whatever it is, like there's so much wisdom you have to impart. And I would also say, definitely do Storycorps. I remember when my father was diagnosed with brain cancer, I had a very dear friend who had just lost her father to brain cancer. And she was like, Tiffany, the thing I can tell you is you really have 9 months. He was given a 9 months diagnosis. Film him. And we're both filmmakers. And I did. And I filmed him. I asked him all these questions. I guess it would be the video version of Storycorps.
Yeah.
And I took him to Storycorps. He's in library. He's inscribed in the Book of Life at Storycorps in the Library of Congress. But that these stories, I treasure that. And your kids and grandkids will treasure those recordings, whether they treasure them now or later, you don't know, or there's going to be, who knows, several generation downs are going to find that recording and find some truth about themselves. And I guess as much as you can share verbally and in audio or writing, or write down your life story, even if you don't think you're a writer, everyone's a writer, just like share these stories and make sure that they're available to your children and grandchildren and great grandchildren and great great grandchildren, because you're going to live a lot longer soon. So who knows how long?
Ladora,
We're approaching our hour.
I have one
Final
last-
words. Go for it.
story.
Final words from our friend.
So Benji was studying American history. We lived in Washington during World War II. My father was assistant to the Surgeon General. He said, what was it like living in Washington during World War II? And I said, well, it was wonderful. It was but we hated Washington because, why, Grandma? Because it was a segregated city.
Mm.
He said, that's impossible. I said, why? He said, that's where Abraham Lincoln lived. How could it have been a segregated city? So we have book learning and we have grandma learning. That's all.
This has been such a gift. First of all, I just thank you to Terry and the Jewish Grandparents Network and David and everyone involved. What a gift to gather all together, and so fun to have my mother-in-law here. And Jane, I could talk to you about anything, anywhere, always. Zoom's always open.
We love each other. And thank you all for coming. I hope this has been of help. And one last thing, you think you don't see them enough because of COVID. They love us. They remember us and they know us, even when we're not in their presence. Remember that, grandparents, because even if they can't grab us by the knees or give us a hug. They love us.
Thank you. God.
Woohoo!
Oh gosh, listen, we're recording this. We're going to post it in our Facebook group. And thank you so much, friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jane and Tiffany, and to everybody who joined us tonight. We welcome you, and we hope you'll come to other Family Room Live events. Have a wonderful evening. Have a good week.
Shana Tova. Everyone go off mute for a second and we can have a woo.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.